Andrea again with Beats by Britain, and this is our external MIDI lesson 2. And we are still going to be back in audio MIDI setup. We're not quite ready to open Logic yet. That's coming up pretty soon. So I already showed you the basic setup in audio MIDI setup, how to set up your external MIDI gear. That was in lesson 1. We're going to go back into audio MIDI setup again. If you don't know how to do it, easiest way to do it is click on your spotlight and just type audio MIDI setup. Okay, it's an Apple utility. It's found on all Macs. So we are back in audio MIDI setup. We have the MIDI Studio window open. Okay, this is from lesson 1. This is actually what my devices look like when they are connected to their respective MIDI interfaces. I have a Korg N1 keyboard that's connected to my Scarlett 18 in 20 out USB audio MIDI interface, and I have an Akai XR20 drum machine that is connected. MIDI in and out are connected to my iConnect MIDI interface. So, okay. So, I'm going to go into my Korg, okay? Because I want to show you a few things here, okay? I'm going to open that. All right. On the back of your MIDI output device, like your keyboard or your drum machine or your wind controller, whatever you have, all right, you're going to have audio jacks, probably at least a couple of audio outs, a left and a right, and maybe a couple more. You're also going to have at least a couple of different types of MIDI outputs or MIDI connections. You're going to have USB, or you're going to have the old school 5-pin, like the round MIDI connections. If you have the round MIDI jacks on the back of your instrument, there's going to be at least 2 of them. There's going to be a MIDI in and a MIDI out. You also might have MIDI through. All right. If you have USB, you don't need to go, well, if you have USB, yeah, I'm still going to show you that, but it's not as complicated to set up. This is for people that have old school MIDI gear with the MIDI in, out, and through, or MIDI in and out jacks. Okay. You're going to open your device that you have set up in Logic or that you've set up on your Mac in MIDI Studio, and you're going to click on ports here. All right. Now, this tells me that this is something that I've done manually. This doesn't happen automatically. You have to add a port. Okay. So you're going to add, and you'll see here on the right that the connectors for port 1 are MIDI in and MIDI out. Okay. I can add another port. Okay. So say, for example, I want to use the MIDI through. I can click on the add, the plus sign there, and call it. All right, and then click on apply. All right. Now, when I look on my Korg here, when I look on this, I've got the MIDI in, like I'm showing you here, through from the Scarlett, and the MIDI out to the Scarlett, and I also have one more. So I could, if I'm using a MIDI through, I could use one of these. Like if I've got another device connected to my MIDI through, like we used to do in the old days when you had to daisy chain MIDI devices, like you might have a drum machine connected to the MIDI through output, or the MIDI through jack on your Korg or on your keyboard. This is how you would connect it. All right. Well, I'm not going to use that. I'm just showing you here how you set up the ports. All right. I'm going to delete what I just put in there. All right. So that's how you set up, add, or delete ports on your MIDI gear. We're going to go back into properties again, and remember, in order for a device to send or to transmit and receive MIDI information on a channel, it has to be white. If you highlight it in blue, it disables that channel. I want my Korg to be able to transmit and receive. My Korg has 16 MIDI channels. I want it to be able to send, to transmit, and receive MIDI information on all 16 channels, including channel 10. Channel 10 is usually devoted just to drums, but I have lots of drum kits on my Korg and I use them all the time, so I want it to be able to do that. And I thought I set this before. I want it to transmit beat clock and time code. All right, so we're going to click on apply. And now my Korg is properly set up in audio, or in the MIDI studio, audio MIDI setup. My Korg is properly set up to be used in Logic. If you learn audio MIDI setup very well, you will save yourself a lot of confusion and headaches in any DAW that you use on your Mac. Reaper, Ableton, Logic, Pro Tools, whatever. If you have your gear properly set up in audio MIDI setup, all of those DAWs use the information in audio MIDI setup. And you'll save yourself a lot of headache. Okay, so now my Korg is properly configured and connected with virtual cables to my Scarlett. Now I'm going to go into the Akai XR20 drum machine. The Akai, because I need the additional MIDI jacks, the MIDI connector, my Akai is connected to an iConnect MIDI interface. So, and if you've ever used iConnects before, they're great. They don't handle audio, but they do handle MIDI, and you can use an iConnect MIDI interface to connect up to like 4 MIDI devices like this. So anyway, here's my Akai drum machine. I'm going to open it up. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on ports. Now my Akai only has MIDI in and MIDI out. It does not have MIDI through. Okay, so this is properly set up. But if you have a drum machine that has additional MIDI jacks, like a MIDI through, you would just click on this plus sign here to add another port. All right. I'm going to go back to properties, and again, remember what I said. The drum machine, yes, drum machines will transmit and receive MIDI over 16 channels, but MIDI channel 10 is dedicated on all devices. It's dedicated really for drum instruments. When I'm in any DAW, Logic or Reaper or Ableton or whatever, if I'm playing my drum machine, if I'm hitting the pads on my drum machine or playing a sequence on my drum machine, I don't want it to sound like a piano or a xylophone or anything else. I want it only to sound, I only want to hear drum samples. So I've turned off all these other channels. If I accidentally set it to send and receive over channel 1, then, you know, I could be hearing piano or anything else. I don't want that. So I've turned off all the channels except for channel 10. So it's going to be transmitting MIDI. My Akai XR20 is going to be transmitting MIDI over channel 10 to whatever DAW I'm using. In this case, it's going to be Logic, but any DAW. And it's also only going to receive MIDI over channel 10. All these other channels are disabled. Right? And again, my Akai XR20 is capable of transmitting and receiving MIDI beat clock and MIDI time code. So I have those checked off. So we're going to click on apply. Okay. You can change the color if you want to. I don't need to. So that is how my external MIDI devices are connected and set up, configured, and everything properly. All right, in audio MIDI setup. This is actually called the MIDI Studio window. You notice something else here? Let me close the colors. iPhone. With the newer Mac operating systems, not sure, I think it might have started in Big Sur. I have Ventura on my machine, but with the newer Mac operating systems, you can use your iPhone as a MIDI input device. The reason mine is grayed out is because I don't have it connected. But let's see what happens when I connect it. Actually, I don't have a cord for it. But if you connect it with the lightning cable, this is going to turn up. This is going to be enabled. And you can use apps on your iPhone as a MIDI input device. Like, say, for example, you have GarageBand with drum pads that you can hit on your iPhone. It's another MIDI input device. It's not external MIDI. It's just a MIDI controller like the MPD 218 is here, but you can use your iPhone for that. Okay? And that's it for lesson 2. Lesson 3, we're going to get into Logic.